There are certain stories that legitimately just seem too strange to...
Let me ask you a question, John. If I told you right now to walk up to any one of these books, now not physically, but mentally, and I want you to flip it open to any page, to look at that page, and to go back and forth and stop at any word, can you see this happening? Close your eyes, and in your mind's eye, envision that occurring. I want to show them at home because people will say later that I changed what I wrote somehow.
All right.
Open your eyes. What was that word?
Hell, dude. This is not staged. This is crazy. I'm blown away. All right, welcome back to Storytime with Mrballen. This was such a hit on the last episode with Tom Segura that we decided we would do more. And today's guest, I got to be honest, they're going to blow your mind. Seriously, I went into this experience sort of skeptical. I mean, the things this person does are sort of impossible. I mean, he goes in front of these audiences, which include huge celebrities and professional sports teams, and effectively reads their minds. He certainly blows their minds. And he does it under so much pressure, and he nails it every time. And so we asked him on the show. He's got some amazing stories, and he also truly I have something written on my hand right now that has to do with one of the tricks that he pulled on me, and it's just, I can't believe how this episode went. So really stick around. He's an amazing guy and just a master of his craft. He's going to blow your mind. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode.
I'm Oz the Mentalist. I'm here on Storytime with Mrballen. I already know what you're thinking. Stick around.
All right, Oz the Mentalist Perlman.
Yeah.
So you are the world's greatest mentalist. I mean, lately I've seen you pop up all over the place. You were just on Joe Rogan and his reaction to when he guesses his
Pissed
ATM.
off. Joe, you have not seen him that angry in a while. You know, he goes down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, and he was like, did you hack me? Have you literally gotten into my life? How did you get my PIN code?
I liked how you were like, hey, let's just be spontaneous. You're like, look, I'm gonna try to guess your ATM PIN code. And you could just see it on Joe. He's like, okay, all right, let's see. And you guessed the first number at some point. You're like, just tell me, is it 1? I think it was 1.
Yep.
And he's like, all right. But then as soon as you began doing it, you could just see his whole mentality, everything shifted. And you can just see as the audience, if this is staged, it's the best staging I've ever seen, because his reaction was not pleasure. It was like, stop.
How'd I do, Joe? Is that your ATM PIN code?
Yeah. That's weird. I'm skeptical because I've got that PIN code in the mail. You know?
People loved seeing it because with Joe, he is the ultimate debunker.
Yeah.
Are we in agreement? Like, no one's going on Joe Rogan and telling Joe what to do.
No.
On the biggest platform in the world, that he is the boss, and he didn't know what was going to happen. And I think that's what captivated the public. Is if you would have been amazed, that's one thing, but he was angry and a little scared.
So tell me, like, what is a mentalist?
Right.
Because I've looked it up.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really accomplish the task here. I want to hear from you. And secondarily, how does one know they have the skill to be a mentalist?
So a mentalist is a form of magic, right?
Okay.
This is not in the world of psychics and supernatural. That's not what I pretend to do. I completely make sure that I go out of my way to ensure people understand I'm not claiming to be a psychic. I'm not supernatural. Instead, I have a series of skills that I've developed, kind of like an arsenal of tools over decades of learning how people think, and it's grounded in magic. So everyone knows what a magician is, right? You could go to an 8-year-old, they've started to see magic tricks. And when we watch magic, we understand that we're being fooled with our eyes. Somehow this person knows how to do things quickly or to distract me so they do something somewhere else, right? When you cut the woman in half, spoiler alert, guys, I'm not trying to ruin Christmas. There's no Santa Claus. You're not really cutting the woman in half. Somehow you're deceiving me with an illusion. That's the name of the word. That's really what it's called. So magic is all about misdirection and fooling the eyes. This is a specialized subset within magic where it's magic of the mind. Very different. I'm not fooling your eyes because there's no fast hands. There's almost no props. I can show up. I had a show last night in Toronto. Came right here from the airport where I did a show. It was a smaller group, about 400 people. And I show up with nothing. I have a pad of paper and a marker, which if I don't have with me, they can grab for me.
Yeah.
The show isn't props, I'm the show. And so what I've learned to do is know how people think. And by knowing effectively how people think, I'll know what they think. And I'll present that in a very entertaining, fooling, and hopefully memorable manner. So mentalism is psychology, misdirection, deception, influence. It's all these different skills baked into one cake.
And is this something that you always knew you possessed? Some skills that ultimately crystallized and became you being the world's greatest mentalist.
Right. Thank you.
Did you have moments in your life before this became a thing where you're like, I have these innate skills that I
Sure.
could refine, but you knew you had them? Or is this something that people could be taught?
Absolutely, people can be taught. So this is a learnable skill, but I would liken it to musical talent, which is innate in a sense, which is you could probably learn to play the piano and do a certain number of songs. Like my 9-year-old plays the piano. If I continued practicing every day for a year, I'd probably get better. But what if I practiced for a decade? Would I ever be good enough to play at Carnegie Hall in New York City? I don't think I would. I think that it's not in me, that innate, God-given gift, whatever you want to call it. You can develop the skills, but will you get to a certain level? There might be a ceiling.
Sure.
So that's the best way to describe it. I have a gift for it, and I've also been very, very persistent, and never underestimate the power of persistence, because mentalism has a steep learning curve, and most people don't have thick enough skin to get through the times when you suck. So magic can be practiced over and over and over in a mirror, and you can improve because it's move-based. It's kind of like playing golf. If you practice your swing, hopefully by the millionth swing, you're gonna be great. You might not be Rory McIlroy or Tiger Woods. With this, the only way that I can get better is by doing it for an audience. Do you see what I mean? You can't practice guessing what people are gonna think without people. And the first few 100 times you do it, you're gonna eat, pardon my French, you're gonna eat shit. Like you're not gonna be good. There's very few mentalists that started good. And so what tends to happen is you perform, you suck, you go, oh my God, that was painful. I don't wanna do that again. I don't wanna experience that suffering. So I did much more magic for years. And then I started dipping my toes in the water of mentalism and then doing a little more and then doing a little more. And then I was on a show, if we like rewind my career, there was a moment where it was like a fork in the road where I was on America's Got Talent.
Of course.
Changed my life. And I rebranded myself as, instead of like, quote unquote, O's the magician, I became O's the mentalist. That's how I literally monikered it, because now I differentiated myself from others and decided I'm not doing magic anymore. That was like the crutch. I just started doing just mentalism.
That's interesting. I think one of the things that I've noticed about you and your rise that's currently up and to the right, you really are killing it right now, is in a way, I feel like I can relate a little bit to the pressure that you put on yourself. And I'll give you some context. So I know that you're into distance running, in addition to like serious distance running. This dude's done like 153 miles.
It's true.
Regularly runs marathons on a whim. It is a physical feat, no doubt. But it is a mental feat more than anything else.
Agreed. It's more mental than physical. Anybody who tells me, oh, I can't do this, I'm like, that you already set yourself up. I can't. You've already created an obstacle in your mind. It's the wrong viewpoint, and your mind translates into your body. So you telling yourself that creates that. I think, the mind controls the body. I've seen people that are 20, 30 years older than me finish a race that I didn't finish. Objectively, I'm fitter than they are, I'm younger than they are, I'm stronger than they are. Why did they finish when I didn't? Because my mind crumbled.
Yeah.
And you know it. I mean, buds, how many people rang that bell?
A lot.
That were probably tough SOBs, but they didn't have it mentally.
It's true. And in fact, you had said that when you first tried the Spartathlon, 'cause you did it twice, right?
I did it twice.
So the Spartathlon's 153 miles,
Yep,
right?
153 miles, 36-hour cutoff. So it's very important. There's races that are longer. Right now, there's a heyday of people running 200-mile races, all this crazy stuff. But this, you can't slow down and walk very much. Like in these other races, they're glorified hikes. No offense to all these people who do 200s. They do it for 4 or 5 days.
Right.
Most of the people are, it's slow. This is running nonstop for a day and a half. You start on a Saturday morning, I'm running till Sunday evening.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And so like what people need to understand about running really long distances, I've done a couple marathons. And that's marathon is 26.2 miles.
Which is very respectable.
Totally. Yeah, it's respectable.
Don't you talk down on yourself.
But when you hit about mile 20, people say that's sort of like the halfway point, even
Yep.
though it's not. 26.2, the halfway is 13.
Right.
But at about 20 miles is when your body sort of reaches that point where it's like, okay, we've lost all the glucose stores. We're sort of burning on muscle at this point. It's
Right.
like you're falling apart. And I remember when I ran a marathon and I hit mile 20, it was like, I can barely move and I have 6 miles to go.
Right.
So for anyone that's even thinking, oh, 153 miles, yeah, you just suck it up and go. That's not how that works. This is like a mental test of magnitudes you may not understand, but you had said if the first time you did the Spartathlon, you did not finish.
Didn't finish.
And you knew as you're running along, you're like, I'm not going to finish this.
Right.
And you're writing the story in your head that you're like, how am I going to spin this to the people that, they expected me to finish and I didn't.
Yes.
But you went back and you ultimately did it again and you
Right.
finished it. That's so highly unusual. One,
Right.
that you went after it in the first place, but two, that you went back and did the race. I think that says a lot about not only your mental toughness, but why you have these innate skills. You've honed those skills to become the mentalist that you are. But you obviously have this ability to put yourself in these highly mentally stressful environments and perform not just well, but at your literal best.
Right.
And so, like, dude, you go in front of an entire NFL football team. And these are also clips you got to check out if you haven't seen them, like the Bengals. You go the
one of my favorites.
And like he'll tell the players, like the quarterback Joe Burrow, and he's like, I'm going to write down who you're going to throw it to, and I'm not going to show you. You're going to do it. Throw it to anybody in the room. And then after you do it, I'm going to show you what I thought. And like the clip, you see that he's written down a name. And sure enough, he turns, he throws the football, and everyone's like, oh, he guessed it right. But then the next time you do it, you write down 2 names. And it's like, he's going to fake to this person and throw to this person, and you're holding it back. And sure enough, Joe, who clearly has no idea what you've written down,
Right.
fake, throw, room goes wild.
Tanner.
Fakes to Jamar, throws to Tanner.
How do you put yourself in that position consistently and just stay calm enough to do those things when the outcome's binary? That's so stressful. How do you do it?
So I think your mindset, and this is where the ultra running and the mentalism go hand in hand, and I think each one has improved the other. Truly, there's physiological things involved, which being able to be calm under pressure, that calmness directly creates the success in the situation, which is when you start panicking, those chemicals that flood through your body can indicate to other people. The same way that animals can smell fear. They can literally smell fear. I think we still have that hardwired in us. We are still animals in a sense where we don't trust our instincts, but we can feel it. Like right now, if somebody walks in the room, even if you don't know that they're there, you have situational awareness where you can sense somebody walked in. How is that, right? It's not sonar. There's something in you that I don't know how we explain that's a sense that can indicate danger, which I'm sure you've had. You can sense on high alert and something floods you because that fight or flight. So in those situations where it's do or die, not literally, but if that screws up in that room, there's no safety net. This football team didn't walk in and get set up and say, hey guys, act excited for this random dude.
No.
Joe Burrow, the funny part about that clip was the day it dropped, the day before he signed the most lucrative contract in NFL history, $275 million with some obscene number that was guaranteed, like $184 million, fact check me. So the best comment, the comment that run up the most was go, dude, he clearly paid this guy to do it. And then my comment under to this guy was, bro, I wish I had enough money to pay Joe Burrow off to pretend to do this. And it got up like 10,000 times because it's so comical. It's like, how do you think?
Right.
The behind the scenes on that, by the way, is great because Joe is very shy. He's a great guy, but I had no time with him. And when you go to these football teams, there's a series of people that are intermediaries. I'm not talking to the players.
No.
There's the PR team, the communications team. These are organizations. And they say to you, that person doesn't want to be involved. And so I say to them, with all due respect, I'll see who wants to be involved. I say yes, but when I get in the room, my job is to convert no's into yeses, where some of the people that thought they wanted nothing to do with me, I'm going to win them over. And the Joe Burrow thing, yes, there was an amazing trick, but getting somebody who, when they sat down in their mind, said 100% no, I'm not getting involved, and then having them not only say yes to what I was going to do, buy in, but then have a monster reaction that's since been viewed hundreds of millions of times and helped change my life, That same thing, that set of skills on how to win people over, influence them, is applicable to everyone in every facet of your life. It works in business, if you're doing sales. It works in relationships, whether it's people you know closely and you want to create deeper bonds, or whether it's people you want to win over, whether it's like a romantic sense, friendship sense. It's how do you meet people and connect with them in a deeper way and get them not only to like you, build rapport, but both of those two things are to do what you want them to do. Not in a nefarious way, but think about it. I'm a parent. I'm trying to win my kids over. I'm selling them all the time my ideas, which is, please do your homework right now, even though you don't want to because there's better things to do. How do you convince them in an effective manner? And that is a form of mentalism, which is knowing how people think and using it to your advantage. That's what I'm doing all the time. And those are the skills you can apply. Going back to what you said with Joe Burrow and all these situations, I have used the running to calm myself and to not think of the finish line, which is when you're at 20 miles and you're miserable. It sounds like 6 miles is so little. It's just 6 miles, man. You've done a 10K before, but in the moment, every step hurts. I'm miserable. I'm puking. I feel terrible. I want to be done now. I want to be on a couch eating ice cream now. What the hell was I thinking doing this race? I am not a superhuman. Like literally, it's the same way that a friend of mine, David Goggins, will say, I don't want to be out there running in the rain, in the cold at 4:30 a.m. But the fact that I don't want to do it is why I'm doing it. Because that's where the real training hits. The moments where it becomes hard is where you learn who you really are. When I'm sitting here talking about running, it's easy. Oh yeah, it's fun. I want to get to the moments where I'm in the deepest, darkest place and I'm asking myself, questioning, why am I doing this? Don't want to do it, and I still persevere. That's where you become stronger. It's where you tear the muscle and grow it back stronger. And those skills have allowed me, when I'm in those pressured moments, and that ultras are like something I stand on, where I'm completely calm. And I'm very aligned, and I'm not going to panic. So the people around me see how calm I am, and I can still keep them within my control.
What you're doing is so stress-packed, almost on purpose.
Right.
You're going in front of this crowd that's like big professional athletes, like all these celebrities, and you're gonna like walk in and impress them and do something that's just unbelievable.
Right.
Is there thrill out of the fact that you know going into that you're gonna be calm and people will see that not only will you perform, but for you, this is what you do. Do you seek these moments out because that is empowering for you?
Man, if we got like into a therapy session of like Freudian, I keep taking big swings at things that I don't know if they're necessarily going to work. But I think that the audience can sense the danger, the risk. That's what's exciting. And so you can feel the excitement through the camera. It's what captures you. Because I don't know, I can't explain it. It's the audience can know internally that this might have gone wrong and it didn't. And that's why you get the big reactions.
So I've done a couple of live speaking engagements, just telling stories to crowds. And I remember I told my production team as we were getting ready to put it together, like, how do you want it to go? How much production value do you want? And I was like, I need the first time I do speaking engagements to be basically just me and a microphone. I want it to be a pure experience because I need to prove to myself that like, I can deliver something that's really engaging without any props, without anything, just me.
Right.
And it was like the sense of, I almost hated myself for doing this because you're setting yourself up, right? I'm going to walk out in front of thousands of people, me and a microphone. I've never done this before.
Right.
It could go horribly wrong. But it's like, I almost felt like the only way to do it was like full send commitment, like commitment to the bit.
You have to.
And I'd go out on stage, and with that sense of commitment, I was able to easily do these shows.
Yeah.
And I think for you, what I see in all these clips of you just like blowing people away, honestly, more than the bit, it is this sense that you are completely committed. And even if it goes wrong, it's like somehow he's going to spin this.
Right.
He's got full command of the room.
People love when it goes wrong. So there's that level of why are those traffic jams where you're like, why was there such a traffic jam? The rubbernecking. Right? The human instinct that's in our DNA of liking to gossip and liking to see what's going on with them. Oh, look at that car. Holy crap. Right? Everyone does it. We're all slowed down. We're on the freaking BQE, and what just happened? Why is, like I-78 is jammed up because one jerk was texting.
Yeah.
And we have to watch that. So that same approach is, again, hardwired in our DNA. So in my show, I'm very keenly aware of moments where I can create stress, confusion, or light chaos. And I can make it so that you forget the things I want you to forget. And then I put the camera on the things I want you to remember. And during the moment where you're recounting what happened, I'm telling the story that you're going to remember in your mind. People don't realize that memory is malleable. So we think of his memory as the same thing as this camera shooting me right now, that we could rewind, play back, and it's immutable. It never changes. It's on camera, right? It's not. People remember certain things, and they are typically related to emotion. So I'll give you a great example. Eyewitness testimony, which you know more than anyone, is inherently unreliable because when people's cortisol levels, adrenaline, they're in a moment where they just saw the shit go down, their body floods with these emotions and all of these things that they're not used to encountering. For most people, they're not into those situations that are high stress. And now suddenly a face, a color of hair, a height, all of that stuff that's captured in 1 or 2 seconds can be changed, especially if you're interrogated later and asked questions and the investigator uses leading language, right? So when you saw this guy who was like 6'2", 6'3", I see? Well, I kind of maybe, right? You can start to change what they have, right? Imagine you do a watercolor painting and it's not dry yet. I can start to change what you painted. I'm narrating the story that you will tell the next person about me. And I will get rid of the parts I don't want, just like an editor clips sections out. And I have it so your memory only remembers the things I want you to tell or the story you tell, because the story you tell about me is what continues. It's what makes me memorable. And anyone that ever walks into a room and is the most memorable person in the room will achieve their goals the most effectively. Just think about it in your head. When you've gone to a party or an event and you've met someone, there's always at an event when you go home and you're talking to your wife or you're talking like, man, did you meet that guy? Yeah, was he? There's always a person who stands out. Sure. If it's a good party. Otherwise it sucks. You're like, everyone's boring. But what made that person interesting? Now, I think in a lot of instances, it's the fact that the person who's very interesting isn't a big talker, but they're very interested and they bring out the best in you. And you feel like, man, they were so interested in me and they give good stories. And they ask me questions I'd never been asked before. And that kind of elevates a certain level in you where you get excited to be around them. Some people have a natural charisma and you analyze, what is a natural charisma? What is it that they do when they walk in the room? They approach with confidence. They typically approach not a direct thing. So another thing that is very important, body posture, body positioning, and how you walk up to somebody you don't know instantly puts you at ease or makes you feel ill at ease and like they're intruding your space. If somebody walks up to you too close, whoa, bro, what are you doing? Chill out. If somebody approaches you quickly and they're talking and they're not slowing down and you don't know when they're gonna leave, then you start getting this feeling of, oh God, am I stuck in this conversation for a while? Versus, and I learned this doing restaurants when I was a kid, if I walk up to you at an angle and it looks like I'm 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and you're seeing one of my eyes, which is again, the way animals react, instead of head on, which scares them, but at a sideways. And if I give you a time constraint, which is, oh, great to meet you. And for me, performing magic, people might not want me there. They don't know who I am, especially at a restaurant where you're having dinner and you're like, who is this kid? And I was 14 and do I have to tip him? Oh my God, do I have any cash on me? All of these things go through your mind. So I have to take away those layers of resistance. And I learned early on what I could do in those moments that applies to everything in life. It's not just about the performance, it's life skills. And I think those life skills translate very effectively into habits for success, no matter what you do.
It seems like you are, to simplify, extremely perceptive about other people. Like you're picking up cues that maybe to you seem like they could be picked up by a lot of people, but your ability, at least the way you're describing it, to read people really, really quickly is astounding. And I'll say, on a much smaller level, I actually did, when I was in the SEAL teams, I did a lot of the speaking with locals. Basically, we'd be on target, and then at the end of whatever conflict we were in, there'd be an opportunity to speak to people that were in whatever village we were in Afghanistan. And truthfully, you're basically talking to the men, and you're trying to discern if they were just shooting at you or they weren't. And it's really hard to tell. And a lot of times, even with the interpreter, a conversation's not going to get you there.
No.
You're really just trying to gauge how they view me.
Intuition and instinct go a long way, right? If you have a gut feeling, you have to trust it. Then try to verify it. But if you get that gut feeling and you ignore it, like, you know, that like tickling of like, this doesn't feel right. I'm sure in your situation, that's life or death.
Yeah, I mean, this was like relatively safe, you know,
Yeah.
so we're safe at this point. But a lot of times I would pick up very quickly if someone was just positioning themselves in a sort of adversarial way. Like, I'm sure, I'm speaking to the guy who knows this stuff,
Yeah.
but there's a way you stand if you're almost sort of seeking a level of conflict with the person you're with.
Right.
If you're deferential, you're sort of positioning yourself in such a way. But like, I'm coming into the room, I'm decked out in like special operations gear, we've just secured the target, and I'm talking to you. And if you're gonna stand toe to toe with me
Right.
and like look me square in the eyes, pretty much immediately I'm like, well, this is a combatant.
Right.
You know, whereas other people, they're like, maybe they're scared or whatever, but it usually comes off very quickly. And then the conversation, to be honest, it wound up being like irrelevant. It's the first like 3 seconds that I'm with somebody. And so for you, I mean, I have no idea if that relates, but are you like reading people and that's basically your tell? Or are you constantly evaluating people, whether it's during a performance or not, like in your life?
Yes.
Are you constantly evaluating? Like, how does that work for you?
So thankfully the stakes are much lower for me. So I don't ever want to put myself on the category of a Navy SEAL defending our country. It's like what I'm doing is entertaining people.
Sure.
And the skills don't generalize. So the next part is people just say, well, if you're this good, why aren't you just winning millions of dollars playing poker?
Oh,
why aren't you
interesting.
like catching, you know, killers? So it's because, again, this is under the guise of entertainment and the skills don't generalize. Very clear cut. Guessing, I'll give a great example. I'm gonna do this in a moment. But if I were to ask at the table and we're playing poker,
Yep.
just look at why don't you know the cards right? Because I have a series of things that I do, procedures, to narrow the options down and figure out what you thought of that involve me being in charge.
Interesting.
Watch this. Let's just play a fun game. Okay. Picture now a card trick. Right now, if I had a deck of cards, and I don't even have one, I could probably get one out of a bag. And you
I
don't
can
have a deck of
imagine
cards.
a deck of cards.
Right? You've never seen a deck of cards today, have you?
No.
No. So when I was a magician, we'd have to have a deck of cards right now. And I would do the old pick one card,
Sure.
and you'd put it back and I'd find it.
Right.
But I don't have a deck of cards. So let's just pantomime this because mentalism is about thoughts. I give you an invisible deck.
Okay, got it.
You mix them up. John,
Okay.
shuffle them up. Let's see those skills. Okay? And now
All right.
you take those cards, and I want you to do this. I want you to spread them out in front of you. And spreading them out in front of you means you can see all 52.
Yep.
And you can make a conscious decision, which
Okay.
some people would say later, well, he somehow influenced you. He used certain words, maybe used certain hand gestures. Something was already planted in your mind
Okay.
so that you would do my bidding.
Okay.
So I want to make this even more impossible. Take the cards and close them up again. Give one more shuffle just to be safe. I love it. And now you're going to spread them face down, which means you can't see them.
All right.
Which means that right now, if I told you to reach down and pick any card, there's no way that you could be influenced because you don't even know which one it is now. I want you to slowly reach down and maybe go to grab one and go, nah, doesn't feel right. And you maybe jump to another one next to it or this one and just grab one card at random. Now, before you turn over, you grab it out.
Okay.
And are we in agreement? It's absolutely impossible that I could know what you just picked because it's not real. It's an invisible card that you haven't even turned over yet. You don't even know what it is,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So you drop the rest of the cards away, gone. And now something happens that's interesting. You turn the card over, you look at it,
Okay.
okay?
Okay.
Hold it up, and I want you to picture that card right there. Can you see it?
Yep.
Now watch. I didn't influence this in any way, did I? This is your own choice, 100%.
100%.
And I say to you, hearts, diamonds, clubs, spades, there's all the four suits, there's the high cards, the low cards, all of these different cards. And you had said earlier, blackjack, poker, look at that card. Imagine what it looks like. Imagine the jack, queen, and king have more ink because they're very full. They've painted them. Versus, for example, a two only has the two hearts and they go all the way through. And you know what you did? You decided, because poker on the back of the box, ace of spades is the card in your hand, isn't it?
Yeah. What the hell, dude? That's crazy. Yeah, it's the ace of spades.
Ace of spades.
Yeah. It's the
An invisible deck of cards didn't exist. So that, I know
Dude,
it seems.
That's crazy.
Thank you.
I changed my mind like 4 times.
I could tell you did. I saw that, the shifting and the changing, and you're like, I might go with a different. You were thinking of a different spade, but you said, no, I'm going to go back. That has to do with,
Dude,
again,
that's crazy. That's crazy. I was actively trying to subvert you. That's
so
crazy.
I can't do that at a poker table because I can't just tell the guy in front of me, look at your two cards before we get the river, look at me, do this, do that. They're gonna be like, screw you, dude, I'm not doing any of this. Get out of my face. Put on the sunglasses, rock and roll. So in my performance, I'm the director. I get to call the shots.
Wow.
So it doesn't unfortunately work with everything. If it did, it'd be amazing. But to answer your question, I'm not living my life in like brrr mode of like, whoop, that guy. I always think of it as in the Bourne Identity.
Oh yeah.
When he loses his memory and he's in that diner and he doesn't know who he is yet.
Yeah.
And he's like, and he tells the guy next to him, why do I know that guy's 255 and can fight? Why do I know this? Why do I know that right now I know the 4 license plates of the cars when I walked in? Why do I know all this stuff? And he's starting to dawn on him that he's like a secret spy agent.
Yeah.
Badass. So I think it's likened to that, where when I turn it on, I'm hyper focused on what I do and my mission at hand. And the analyzing people very quickly is very, very similar to what you did, except it's done for under the context of entertainment, which is when I'm in a crowd, I'm looking around to see who I think will be great for my next trick when I'm performing. This person right now. And if you ask me, why was he so good? People will come up to me at the end of the show and go, why didn't you pick me? And I go, no offense to you. I just, for whatever reason, and it's the intangible, it's the 30 years of training, you just weren't as good as them right now. I thought they would deliver the best reaction and they would mesh with what I wanted. Now in certain rooms, I can't pick the person. You're on TV with 3 hosts, you got to use those 3 hosts. You make the best of a situation. But when I have people to choose from, and if you see me at like a live show, that's very exciting. And the fact that you like throw frisbees, we pick people randomly. If we're in like an arena, we shoot t-shirts to like the 8th row, who's got it, stand up please. And how could I know who would catch the t-shirt? How could I know who'd catch a frisbee? How could you know any of this stuff? Then I work with those people, and that's what really makes it real, because yo, that's anyone. This is some drunk jerk who's like 8 rows in, who's, you know, barely conscious. How in the world did you guess the name of his first crush?
I'm still sort of in shock that you just did. So I'm like thinking through how are you doing this? I realize that there's more to it than like you, oh, here's how you, I was pretty good at, the reason I was the guy that did a lot of the questioning of the people on site is because I had decent perception. I was pretty good at figuring out who likely had more information, and it would like lead to weapons caches and whatever. So it was just like, basically, I was successful enough that I kept doing it. So I was pretty perceptive. But like,
I think you still are.
Well, thank you. But it's like, to be able to break down beyond a gut feeling to like specifics is just, where we talked about this thing that you do, when you're making it out, you're very humble about it. Like, yeah, you can learn how to do it and whatever it is. But like, no, you can't.
I had to. Like, again, I wasn't Spider-Man, you know, bitten by a spider and radioactive and like I changed. It's been trial and error. It's been iteration. And the same thing that has allowed me to go run 153 miles, that, like, how you have children. We were talking about right when I walked in, we had a couple minutes. I came here from the airport talking about our kids, and you want to instill a work ethic in your kids. It's very interesting because being a parent, I think, is my most important job. And I'm assuming that's my immortality. It's like, who are they going to be? Because as soon as you have kids, you start to feel like, I'm going to die one day and this is my future and their future. And it's like, it really, no greater joy in life. But how do I instill a work ethic in them? Because my kids aren't going to grow up the same as me. And I'm feeling, I don't know what your beginnings were. Mine were very humble, where I had to work really hard. And I was like age 16, I was supporting myself, which I don't wish upon my kids. They'll never know what that means. But I lived on my own, and I had to pay for college, and I had to find an apartment, and like nobody paid for this stuff. So I had to figure life out early, which at the time I felt kind of pissed, because I'm like, all these other kids are going on vacation. They have a car, their parents. I don't have any of that. But now in hindsight, that set me up for success in a huge way. And it made it so I didn't have a safety net. So I had to become the safety net. And I think that there's a level of that toughness you have to either create in yourself, if it's not, and a lot of people are going to have it, because a lot of people listening to this are, you know, hustling, and they might not have any of these things. So I think that deciding on a goal and not giving up is it's so much more important than almost natural talent, skill, anything, is persistence. And you saying like, oh, I can't do this, there shouldn't be that word in your vocabulary.
You said something going back to your Spartathlon experience that actually really struck a chord with me. And I'll give you a quick story that I think relates, and I think that it plays into what you just said. So when you did not finish your Spartathlon race, you came back, and you obviously did it, and you successfully completed this.
It ate me alive. Are you kidding me? It killed me.
But you said something to the effect of, when I went into that second attempt, I was prepared to basically die
Yeah.
in order to complete this race. So for me, I've had exactly that experience one time, and it changed my life afterwards. When I was in SEAL training, everyone thinks the hard part is at the beginning of training. The
Right.
famous sort of like hell week, and you're running around on the beach and you're beat down and you're tired. That's bad.
Right.
Not the hardest part. The hardest part comes about halfway through training. It's a 6-month-long course.
Today, I'm going to share 3 little-known, ridiculous backstories of 3 very famous people. And the last one has a very satisfying ending. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please replace the like button's Shroot Bucks with Stanley Nichols. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In 1971, a 19-year-old Irishman named William began studying physics and computer science at a university in Belfast, Northern Ireland. While he was certainly smart enough to complete the 4-year degree, after 1 year of being in the school, he decided to drop out because he felt like this was not the path he wanted to be on. So he moved back home to a town about 30 minutes north of Belfast, where he got a job as a forklift driver and truck driver for the Guinness Beer Factory. And while he loved this job, he still felt like this was not the path for him. He needed to do something more with his life. And so he decided he would pursue what 2 of his siblings had gone on to do, which was to become a school teacher. He had always admired his school teachers growing up, and he idolized his 2 siblings that had become teachers, and so it felt like the right fit. And so William applied to a 4-year teaching college in Newcastle in England, and after he was accepted, he flew to England, he got set up, and then he began his studies. The first year was great. He loved what he was doing, he did feel like this is the right fit, and he was getting good grades, everything was going exactly to plan. But then year 2 happened and everything went off the rails. A requirement to graduate from this 4-year teaching college was all the aspiring teachers starting in their 2nd year had to go teach real students real lessons. They basically had to go to high schools and elementary schools and fill in for the real teacher and give a real lesson. And they were scored on their ability to do that. But all the aspiring teachers knew that when you gave these real lessons to real students, what really ended up happening was the students did not take the aspiring teachers seriously. They viewed them as kind of like substitute teachers, and so they didn't respect them and they didn't listen to them. And so typically these real teaching sessions just turned into the aspiring teachers desperately trying to calm down their pupils long enough to get them to listen to their lesson plan for just 1 second. But normally it didn't work out, and before long the day was over and nothing was really accomplished. So in William's 2nd year, when it was his turn to go over to a high school and administer his lesson plan, he went over there knowing what he was up against. He did not really expect it to go well. But he decided he would go in there with a positive attitude and he would try to do his best. But as soon as he walked into his classroom, he immediately could tell he was going to be overwhelmed. Everybody's standing up and talking amongst themselves, and they turn around and they see William walking in, and they have this moment of realization that their real teacher is not going to be teaching them that day. It's going to be this substitute, William, and they all kind of gleefully began laughing and joking, and they just turned their backs on William and kept talking amongst themselves. And so William goes inside, he puts his stuff on the desk, and he attempts to get the class to listen to him by saying, "Hey everyone, come on, sit down, time to listen up, I'm your new teacher for the day." But the kids just were not listening. And so finally, William, who was a really big guy, he was 6'4", he was in great shape, he kind of postured himself and then yelled at the class, "Sit down right now." And at this, the class did turn around and looked at William and kind of sized him up, and most of them decided, okay, it's time to sit down. And so 99% of the class goes quiet and sits down, except for one kid. It was this 15-year-old boy who was at the back of the room, and he was standing up, defiant, with his arms crossed, staring at William with a smirk on his face. And all around him, all his cronies were sitting down looking up at him, laughing and kind of looking up at William and laughing at him, knowing that a confrontation was about to ensue. And so William is staring at this kid, trying to get him to just sit without saying anything, and this kid is just mean mugging him with his arms crossed and nothing's happening. And so William walks right up to him and kind of leans over his shoulder and says, "You need to go out in the hallway right now. I will meet you out there." And then William turned around and started walking back towards the front of the room, expecting this to have worked, that this 15-year-old kid would have just followed right along and he'd walk right out to the hallway and that would be that. But when he turned back around again, the 15-year-old kid had not moved. He was still standing in the back of the classroom, arms crossed, staring up at William, basically saying, "Make me." And at this, William lost his mind. He was so mad and so frustrated at how unbelievably disrespectful this kid was being, and really the whole class was being to him, that he just kind of lost it. And he ran up to this kid in the back of the room and he gets right up in his face. And remember, William is 6'4". He's a big guy. And he gets right in the kid's face and he's like, "Get out in the hall right now!" And this kid doesn't flinch. Instead, he reaches into his pocket and pulls out a knife and he holds it right up against William. And William, without any hesitation, just winds up and blasts this kid across the side of the head, sending him flying over a kid sitting at a desk. He goes flying over this kid and crumples into the corner. And then when he stands up, he drops the knife and puts his hands up and he's like, okay, I'll go out in the hall. And William's like, go out in the hall right now. And so the kid ran out of the classroom. He goes out into the hall and the whole class is totally silent. No one even wants to look up at William. They're all kind of just looking down at their desk, trying to be as quiet as possible. And William walks back to the front of the class and proceeds to teach the rest of the lesson. As soon as the high school learned that this aspiring teacher, William, had basically knocked out one of their students, even though it seemed like it might have been a little bit deserved, they immediately told the teacher's college, and the teacher's college immediately expelled William. And so now William is suddenly jobless and he's kind of lost again in the world. He doesn't know what he wants to do now because he really had committed to being a teacher. And so he goes back to his home in Northern Ireland and he begins thinking about, what is he going to do next? And he keeps having this thought that he should pursue this thing that he's always been interested in, but he had never taken seriously because it felt so risky. But now that basically everything in his life had fallen apart, he had nothing to lose. So he decided, what the heck, I will do the thing that I've always wanted to do. And that was stage acting. And so he went and auditioned with a local theater company in Belfast. He was accepted into the theater troupe. And then 4 years later, he was discovered performing on stage by a Hollywood filmmaker. And they cast him in a movie. And the rest, as they say, is history. William Neeson, better known as Liam Neeson, would go on to star in dozens of huge movies and TV shows. And he's probably best known for his epic role in the movie Taken, where he is this CIA operative with a particular set of skills, and in this movie he punches a lot of people in the face, just like when he was a teacher. In 1963, when Tim Dick was just 10 years old, he went over to his friend's house and he snuck a bottle of whiskey from one of their shelves. He pulled it out and he poured himself a full glass to the brim with whiskey, and then he downed it in one huge gulp. Tim had grown up idolizing cowboys on TV, and every time he watched them, they would come galloping into some town, they would go into the saloon, and they would sit at the bar just throwing back shots of whiskey. And so Tim always assumed whiskey must be this totally amazing, refreshing drink for these guys to be drinking it out in the heat of the desert. But unfortunately for Tim, after he slugged this huge glass of whiskey, it was not refreshing. It tasted like gasoline, and his chest felt like it was on fire. But instead of being turned off by alcohol and waiting until he was older and of age to try it again, Tim instead thought, you know what, the next time I have whiskey, I just need to water it down a little bit. And so for the next year, Tim continued to periodically sneak whiskey out of his friends' cabinets, and he would drink this watered down whiskey. And then when he turned 11 years old, his father, who he was very close with, died tragically in a car accident. And Tim really didn't have a good way to cope with the grief of losing his father, and so he turned to drinking even more than he already was. And before long, Tim was like this young kid who basically was an alcoholic. But he hid it extremely well. He graduated high school, he graduated college, and really nobody knew he was drinking as much as he was. But after he graduated college and he was living on his own in Michigan, there was no structure in place or person in place to stop Tim from going overboard with his substance abuse. And so not only did his drinking get completely out of control, but he began using and selling drugs, namely cocaine. In 1978, when Tim was 25 years old, he and his drug dealing partner were scheduled to take part in the biggest drug deal of their careers. They would be selling about 1.5 pounds of cocaine to a guy named Michael Pfeiffer, and he'd be buying it for $42,000, which when you adjust that for inflation would be like buying it for $175,000 in 2021. Tim and his partner were very excited about all this money they were going to make, but they were equally worried about the transaction. A lot can go wrong. And so Tim decided, in order to mitigate their nerves and kind of make this a safer drug deal, he decided they would do the transaction inside of a public airport, because Tim had seen that done on TV and believed that would give them an additional layer of safety. And so on the day this deal is going to take place, Tim takes the 1.5 pounds of cocaine, he puts it inside of a brown Adidas gym bag, and he also throws a key lock inside of this bag. He zips it up, he walks outside, he dumps the bag in the back of his car, and he drives to the Kalamazoo International Airport in Michigan. When he gets there, he parks in the big parking lot right outside of the front doors, and as soon as he's parked, he goes around to the back of his car, he pulls out this brown Adidas bag, he throws it over his shoulder, shuts his trunk, and then he waits for his partner to show up. A couple of minutes later, right on time, his partner pulls into the lot, he parks nearby, and then the two of them very casually begin walking towards the front doors of this airport. They walk up the steps, they go in the front doors, and as soon as they're inside, they're looking around, and they find Michael Pfeiffer. He's standing up against the wall right in the area he had said he would be. And so without making any sort of contact with Michael, Tim and his partner turn the corner and they go into a nearby locker room. Once they're inside, Tim pulls the lock out of the brown bag, and then he puts the bag with the drugs in it inside of a locker. He shuts it and then uses the lock he had just pulled out to lock the locker. And then he and his partner leave the locker room. As soon as they go out into the main terminal, they start walking over towards Michael Pfeiffer. And as they get closer and closer, Tim's partner breaks off and goes to a bench on the other side of the terminal, and Tim continues walking on right up to Michael. And then when he reaches Michael, he very discreetly hands him the key to the lock on the locker, and he tells him which locker number the drugs are in. Michael doesn't say anything, he takes the key and he heads off to the locker room. Tim turns and he goes over to his partner and he sits down on the bench and waits. Meanwhile, Michael goes inside the locker room, he uses the key, he opens up the lock, he opens the locker up, he checks to make sure the drugs are still there. They are. As soon as that's confirmed, he takes the bag, he throws it over his shoulder, and he walks back out to the main terminal to meet up with Tim and his partner. Tim and his partner are sitting on the bench, they see Michael coming out of the locker room, and they're expecting Michael to walk over and basically hand them a bag full of $42,000. But instead, Michael walks up to them and draws a gun and points it at them and says, "I'm a police officer, you're under arrest." It would turn out this was a sting operation. Michael Pfeiffer, the undercover police officer, had been following around Tim and his partner for months. In Michigan at the time, if you were caught trying to sell 650 grams or more of cocaine, there was an automatic penalty of a life sentence. And Tim and his partner had just been arrested trying to sell more than 650 grams of cocaine. And so facing a life sentence, Tim took a deal that gave him a lesser sentence in exchange for information about other drug dealers. And so Tim would ultimately serve 2 years and 4 months in a federal penitentiary before he was released. Tim would say his time in prison was absolutely miserable, but it was necessary. It matured him in a major way, and it honed his sense of humor. Tim was always a very funny guy. He was always the class clown and the guy goofing around, but in prison, he found it a very difficult task to get these hardened prisoners and prison guards to laugh at his jokes. But eventually, with enough practice and repetition, he could get anybody in that prison to laugh at him. And so by the time he got out, he was like an amazing comedian. And so he decided, you know what? Why don't I pursue a career in comedy? 4 years later, Tim Dick, better known as Tim Allen, landed the starring role on the hit TV show Home Improvement. And from there, he starred in dozens more movies and TV shows, but he's probably best known for his voice acting in the very popular movie series Toy Story, where he plays Buzz Lightyear. Today, Tim is sober and has been for decades. In 1964, during his final semester of college in Wisconsin, a 21-year-old man named Harry decided to take an acting class. He believed it would be an easy A, and he'd always been pretty shy, and so he figured this class might be able to help him get over that. But this class wound up having a much larger impact on Harry's life than he ever could have imagined. Not only did he meet his future wife in this class, but he also realized he loved acting, something he never thought he would like, and he decided after college that that was the thing he was going to pursue. And so after he graduates later that year, he and his girlfriend get married, and then they fly out to Hollywood, California, where Harry auditions for Columbia Pictures' New Talent Program, which is basically this program that's designed to help new actors and actresses get parts in Hollywood because it's so hard to do that. And so he's accepted into this program, he signs a contract with them that pays him almost nothing, and right away they start shopping him around for different parts in TV shows and movies, but nobody is interested in Harry. Nobody. The only roles he was getting were incredibly minor and usually non-speaking, and so it was really not advancing his career. Then, in 1966, so 2 years after he and his wife had arrived in Hollywood, Harry received what seemed like his first big break. He was offered a speaking role in a movie, although it was a very minor role. It was a 60-second bit where Harry basically walked on screen in this hotel, and he started calling out for a particular guest, and when he finds this guest, he walks up and gives him a piece of paper, and then he leaves. So it's a forgettable scene, but it's a real scene in a real movie. And so this was a big deal for Harry. And so after Harry goes over to the studio and he films this whole scene and it's all done, he goes back over to the headquarters of the New Talent Program at Columbia Pictures. And as soon as he goes inside, one of the producers that was in charge of this New Talent Program, who had apparently had a chance already to see this 60-second scene in this movie that Harry was in, he calls Harry over and asks him to go up to his office for a second. So the pair go up to his office, they both sit down, and the guy looks at him and says, "Look, I just gotta shoot you straight here. You're not gonna make it in Hollywood. You're not gonna be a movie star." When Tony Curtis was told to carry groceries across this room in one of his first movies, everybody knew right away as he's carrying those groceries that that guy, he's going to be a movie star. You could see it in the scene, even though all he was doing was carrying groceries. And when you did your scene as the bellhop walking around the hotel, I just didn't see it. You don't have the X factor. You're not going to be a movie star. For reference, Tony Curtis, the guy this producer was referencing, was a huge movie star in the 1950s and 1960s. And so Harry, after getting this horrible comment made about him, he pauses for a second, and then he leans across the table and looks at this producer and squints his eyes and says, "You know, if Tony was such a good actor, shouldn't we have believed he was just a grocery delivery boy, not a movie star?" And at this totally smart aleck remark, the producer fired Harry on the spot. Harry would go on to sign a similar New Talent Program deal with Universal Studios, but again, he could not get a real part to save his life. And the feedback he finally got was, "Harry, you're just not pretty enough, and you're not really that talented." By the mid-1970s, Harry was in his mid-30s, and while he still aspired to be an actor and wanted to be an actor, he was making almost no money from acting. And so he decided, instead of acting, he was going to become a carpenter. That was going to be his full-time job, despite the fact he knew nothing about carpentry. And so he literally, just because he has this interest in carpentry, goes to the library and checks out all these how to be a carpenter books. And over the next couple of weeks, he studies these books and does a couple projects around his own house. And then finally, he just felt confident enough, or he was just desperate enough for money, that he began going around to his network and asking people in Hollywood if they needed some woodworking, if they needed help from a carpenter. And surprisingly, lots of people took him up on his offer and they hired him to be their carpenter. And before long, Harry was dubbed the Carpenter to the Stars, which was kind of ironic because he actually was not a very good carpenter, and he was regularly seen on the job, literally holding a book, teaching him how to be a carpenter while doing the carpentry with his other hand. In 1976, Harry was a full-fledged carpenter and had been for about a year when one of his very close friends named Fred Roos, who was a casting director and film producer, gave him a call and told him he had a very unique opportunity for him. Now, at this point, Harry was not looking for any more acting roles. He kind of figured that that ship has sailed, even though he wishes he could be an actor. At this point, he had a wife, he had 2 sons, and so he's thinking, I gotta just keep doing this carpentry thing because I gotta pay the bills. So he says to Fred, I appreciate the offer of whatever this is, but if it has to do with acting, I'm just not interested. And Fred, who was one of the very few people in Hollywood who fundamentally believed Harry was destined to be a star, told Harry, no, this is different. This is not a pure go out and try out for the part and hope for the best. This is like put yourself in a good position and maybe somebody will discover you're as talented as you really are. And so Harry's like, okay, tell me about this opportunity, I'm interested. And so Fred explained there was this really talented and eccentric film director who was trying to cast an upcoming movie. And the way he went about casting for movies was a little bit strange. Instead of having each of the actors and actresses show up and individually audition for their parts, he would group batches of actors and actresses and he would have them audition as a group, because that way he could tell if there was chemistry amongst some of the actors and actresses, and he could gauge their individual talent. And so he had all these groups already planned out, but one of the groups was missing one male actor. Somebody had dropped out at the last minute and was not going to be there on the day of the audition. And so when Fred Roos heard through the grapevine that this director was going to be short this one person, he immediately reached out to the director and said, hey, I got your guy. There's this guy, Harry. He's done a little bit of acting. He's incredibly talented. You got to give him a chance. At the minimum, he can come in there and he can at least just read the lines and help you do this audition, but I know he's available that day and I know he would love to help. And so this director tells Fred, okay, thank you. I'd love to have him come down, but stress to him, he is not auditioning for any part in this movie. I'm not bringing in some person and just throwing them in. It takes me a long time to find people that I want to audition, and he is not one of them. He is just there to facilitate the audition. He's just going to read the lines so the other people in his group can do their audition. And so after Fred stopped explaining the situation, Harry was actually kind of annoyed. He was annoyed that Fred had basically already volunteered him, and so he couldn't really even say no without making Fred look bad. And he didn't like the idea that this was basically a waste of his time. He was being asked to go read lines, but not even try out. So how was this even an opportunity? But Fred told him, look, worst case scenario, you meet some pretty powerful people in Hollywood. This director's a big deal. The people there are going to be big deals in Hollywood. So you'll meet them and maybe they will recognize your talent. Or maybe you get some new clients for your carpentry business. So no matter what, you get something out of it. And so finally, Harry says, okay, fine, I'll go do this thing. And so Harry goes to this audition, he's handed the script, and he's reminded repeatedly to not attempt to audition. Don't try to act, just read the lines. I don't care if you're monotone, you just read these lines because you're not auditioning. Everybody else is, you're not. Is that clear? And Harry's like, yes, I get it. I'm just reading the lines. And so Harry sits down and he starts reading the lines and he's trying to do what they told him to do, but the way he was actually feeling and his actual personality began seeping through. He started coming off as this really grumpy and sarcastic guy that just didn't care about anybody there. He was just totally bitter that he was in the situation he was in. And apparently, this is exactly what the director was looking for in one of the characters he was trying to cast. That kind of nonchalant, bravado, macho, alpha type guy who just didn't care about anybody. And so over the course of the day, as he's reading the script over and over again, not caring at all about how he's performing, he's just simply reading these lines and just being himself, he was actually doing this amazing job portraying one of the characters. And so they let Harry go the whole day. No one told him they were looking at him as a potential character. And then at the end of the day, when Harry was about to just throw the script in the trash and leave without talking to anyone, the film director, better known as George Lucas, walks up to Harry, better known as Harrison Ford, and says, wait a minute, I was wrong. You are perfect for this movie, Star Wars. You need to play Han Solo. And so Harrison Ford said, all right, I'll play Han Solo. And that role as Han Solo propelled Harrison Ford into the megastar that we know him as today. A few years after Harrison had starred in Star Wars and he was this total A-list celebrity, he was at a Hollywood studio in one of their restaurants when one of the waiters walked over to him with the silver tray, and on this silver tray was a single business card. So Harrison reaches over, he grabs the business card, the waiter walks away, and he looks at the card, and handwritten on it is the phrase, "I missed my bet." And he flipped the card over, and it was the name of that producer from the new talent program that had called Harry into his office and said, "You're never going to make it in Hollywood and you're fired. It was that guy, and he had apparently sent the waiter over to make amends because he was eating lunch in the same restaurant. And so Harrison would later say in interviews that at the time he got this card, and to this day that he was doing this interview, he said it gave him immense pleasure that when he looked up from this business card and he understood the situation, he knows this guy's in the room somewhere, as he looked around the room, he couldn't recognize the guy because he didn't know what he looked like. He was a nobody. And so instead of wasting any more time looking for this producer, he just looked at the card, chucked it, and went back to eating his lunch. So that's gonna do it, guys. If you found the secret in today's episode, let us know in the comments section what it is and where you found it, so give us the timestamp. And if you're the first to do that, we'll pin you at the top of the comments section. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please replace the like button's Shroot Bucks with Stanley Nichols. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly 2 or 3 video uploads. We are now selling merchandise like flannels and hats and mugs and sweatshirts and all sorts of stuff. If you're interested in buying official Mrballen merch, go to shopmrballen.com. And to learn about upcoming deals and promotions, check out our shop's Instagram page. The username is shopmrballen. If you want to get in touch with me, you can direct message me on Instagram or on Twitter. My username for both platforms is the same. It's johnballen416. I also have a ton of content over on TikTok where my username is Mrballen. We also have a second YouTube channel called Mrballen Shorts where we post random short videos and lost episodes. If you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit just called Mrballen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or some combination, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya. Sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, and today we're going to look at 3 stories that demonstrate that. But before we get into today's stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once or twice every week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer to make the like button a nice oregano grilled cheese, but instead of using oregano, use ground up poison ivy. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's stories. In the late 1800s, a deadly phenomenon was occurring in America. Fire departments were beginning to use these large safety nets that resembled these huge circular stretches of canvas to try to save people that were stuck in burning buildings. During a multi-story fire, these firefighters would show up and they would get out this big net and they would all take up positions around it, holding on to the edges, and then they would move it directly underneath one of the windows of the burning building, and then they would call out to the people inside to jump out of the window onto the net. And then when they jumped, the firefighters would make sure to maneuver the net to try to catch the person right in the middle, breaking their fall and saving their lives. However, the deadly phenomenon was that these people who were stuck in these buildings were more afraid to make the jump onto the net than they were of the fire. And so despite the firefighters' constant urges to please just jump, they would stay put and they would die in the fire. And so fire departments all over America were desperately trying to find ways to educate the American public about the relative safety of these nets, that certainly making this jump is a better bet than staying in an actively burning building. But despite their efforts, Americans were still staying put in these buildings and dying unnecessarily. In 1883, which was around the time of this deadly phenomenon, a diving instructor working out of Washington, D.C. named Robert Odlum heard about this issue, and he thought to himself, you know, if Americans just maybe saw someone make the jump successfully, they wouldn't be afraid anymore. And since Robert was a diving instructor and so was very comfortable jumping from heights, he thought, well, who better to make these demonstrations than me? And so, in collaboration with several Washington, D.C. fire departments, Robert began hosting these demonstrations where he would leap out of multi-story buildings onto the safety net. And very quickly, these demonstrations began attracting very big crowds, but not because they wanted the education of the event. They just wanted to see someone jump out of a building onto a net. It was like a circus act. And Robert, who was not expecting this to happen, found himself really enjoying the attention he was garnering. And so pretty quickly, he stopped doing demonstrations to show show off fire net safety, and instead began jumping off of huge bridges into bodies of water just because people thought it was awesome. He was becoming this celebrity in Washington, D.C. And soon, Robert began taking his show all over the country, basically touring to all these bridges all over America, and he would put out these flyers all over the city, encouraging people to show up to the bridge on the day of his jump, and then when he would get to the bridge, there'd be hundreds and hundreds of people cheering him on. But Robert's very unlikely and rapid rise to fame and fortune quickly spawned copycats. And in 1885, so 2 years after Robert had begun this jumping venture, his popularity was beginning to wane because he was no longer as unique. Before, it was really just him doing these jumps, and now he was kind of a commodity. And so, feeling desperate to become relevant again, Robert thought to himself, you know, I gotta do something that sets me apart from all the other bridge jumpers. I gotta do something that nobody else has done. That way I can once again become the bridge jumper. And it just so happened there was a bridge that had recently been constructed in New York called the Brooklyn Bridge that was massive. It spanned 1,600 feet from Brooklyn across the East River to New York City, and at its highest point, it was a whopping 130 feet off of the water. And so if Robert made that jump, he would actually set the record for the highest bridge jump ever. But by this point, bridge jumping had become popular enough that police had caught on to it and they had made it illegal, mostly to protect the bridge jumpers from themselves. And so anytime police saw advertisements for an upcoming bridge jump, they would show up to the location on the day of the jump in force and they would stop the jumper from jumping. And so Robert knew this, but he still needed to get the word out about this big Brooklyn Bridge jump. And so he created a very clever word of mouth campaign amongst people in New York, and he also began handing out these flyers that were fairly cryptic, but still told people where to go and at what time for this big spectacle they were going to see. And on May 19th of that year, the day of the jump, Robert's underground advertising campaign had worked beautifully. By early that morning, the Brooklyn Bridge was covered with hundreds and hundreds of people, also down on the banks as well. There's all these people who are all waiting to see Robert make this record-setting jump. Robert had become a bit of a showman since he began doing these bridge jumps, and he had developed a sort of trademark entrance. He would arrive in a black horse and carriage, and then once it stopped on the bridge, he would leap out, and he'd be wearing this long coat, and he would take it off, revealing his swimsuit, and the crowd would cheer, and then he would wave to the crowd, and then he would just run to the edge and leap off the bridge. And so on May 19th, all these people who are waiting for Robert, they're looking for this black horse and carriage, and around noontime, someone spotted it. It was coming onto the bridge from the Brooklyn side, and then once it stopped on the bridge, the door flung open, and Robert leapt out in his big coat. He ripped his coat off, revealing his swimsuit. The crowd was going wild. Everyone was so pumped about this. He's waving and getting ready, and he starts running to the railing to make this jump, and before he jumps, the police swarm him and arrest him. The police were not dumb. They had caught on to this underground advertising campaign, and so like everyone else, they were out in force on this bridge. There were all these officers everywhere, and so as soon as they saw this carriage, they immediately rushed over, intercepted it, and they stopped him. And so as they're arresting Robert, the crowd is starting to boo, and they're chanting, "Let him jump! Let him jump!" And the police, who are all kind of gathered on the Brooklyn side of the bridge, they're telling people to start to disperse, and as they're doing this, something incredible happens. On the far other side of the bridge, on the New York side of the bridge, another black horse and carriage had just come to a stop on the bridge. The doors had flung open, and a man had jumped out wearing a long coat. He had ripped it off, revealing a swimsuit, and the crowd went wild. It was the real Robert Odlum. The man the police had arrested was actually an actor that Robert had paid to pretend to be him. Robert had told him to show up at a particular time and make the typical entrance that he would in order to suck all the police to that side of the bridge, and then while that was happening, Robert would show up and have enough time and space to make the jump. And his plan had worked perfectly. And so the police, who are on the Brooklyn side, they see this happening and they realize there's no way they can run all the way across the bridge and stop Robert before he makes the jump. And so, like everyone else, they just kind of walked to the railing and they watched. And so the real Robert, after revealing his swim swimsuit. He waved to the crowd. He's smiling. Everyone's going crazy. And he runs over to the railing. He climbs onto the other side, and he's looking out over the water. And he gives one more wave to everyone down below in boats and on the banks and on the sides of the bridge. And everyone's going crazy. And then he jumps. Onlookers would later say that at first his jump was perfect. As soon as he leapt off the bridge, like he always did, he put his right arm straight over his head and he tucked his left arm by his side. This allowed him to stay in an upright vertical position as he fell. But just a second into his fall, a strong gust of wind blew Robert off his axis, and suddenly he was falling on his side. Now, it's important to understand, bridge jumpers, when they jump from really high heights, they need to land feet first in a vertical position. This allows their feet to, quote, break the surface tension of the water before the rest of their body comes crashing down. And if they do it that way, the water functions much like the firefighter's safety net. It will break the jumper's fall and save their life. But if the jumper lands at basically any other angle, the water tension will not break fast enough before the rest of their body hits the surface of the water. And so the water, instead of functioning like a net that will save them, will actually function like concrete. So after this gust of wind had blown Robert onto his side, he began flailing in midair to try to get himself back to his upright vertical position, but he couldn't do it in time, and so he slammed into the water directly on his right side. And when the crowd saw this, they figured something was wrong, but they didn't really know, and so everyone just kind of gasped and waited to see what would happen next. And they're looking, and then finally Robert emerges from the deep, except he's face down and he's motionless. And so some of Robert's friends who were on a boat below, they leapt into the water, they swam over to Robert, they pulled him back to the boat, they got him up on the deck, and when they looked at him, he looked awful. There was blood coming out of his mouth, he was barely conscious, and he would just say to them, "Did I make a good jump?" And then he would die. An autopsy would reveal that Robert's impact with the surface of the water had basically obliterated all of his insides. Amongst other things, his liver, his spleen, and both his kidneys had ruptured, and all of the ribs on his right side were broken. A year later, another bridge jumper named Larry Donovan would make the jump off of the Brooklyn Bridge and survive, setting the record for the highest bridge jump at the time. In 1978, 49-year-old Georgy Markov, who was originally from Bulgaria, was living in London and working as a reporter for the British Broadcasting Company, or BBC for short. Georgy had moved to London 6 years earlier, and in the early days of him being in the UK, he would always take a cab or a bus to work. But over the last couple of years, he had taken to walking to work. Not only was it great exercise, but he also just loved the scenery. In particular, he liked on his commute to stop on the Waterloo Bridge, this very famous bridge in London, where from that position, he had a beautiful view of the Westminster Palace on one side, and he had the iconic London Eye on the other, which is a very famous Ferris wheel. So on the morning of September 7th of that year, Georgy got up and he left his flat and he began his typical commute into work. However, by the time he reached the Waterloo Bridge and was getting ready to take in the sights, it had started to rain and Georgy did not have an umbrella. And so instead of sightseeing, he just kept on walking as quickly as he could to try to get to his office before he got completely soaked. But by the time he was just on the other side of the Waterloo Bridge and still had quite a distance to cover to get to work, the skies had completely opened up. And so as much as Georgy wanted to walk, because this was something he really enjoyed, he decided it was not worth it. And so he began looking for a bus stop, and he found one pretty quickly, and he rushed over to it. There was an awning that the commuters could stand underneath, and so he ran underneath this awning, getting out from under the rain, and then he proceeded to wait for the next bus to take him the rest of the way. As he stood there waiting, he suddenly felt a shooting pain in the back of his right thigh, and instinctively, without even knowing what it was, he just reached down and grabbed his leg, but he couldn't feel anything, and then he tried to kind of look around and look down at his leg, but it was just too crowded around him, so he really couldn't do it. And so he's standing there puzzled, still grabbing at his leg, wondering what could have caused this pain. And the only things he could think of were, maybe someone near him had a pen or a pencil out and they accidentally poked him, or maybe it's some sort of bug that bit him, a spider or a bee or something. He didn't know, but there weren't that many scenarios that made sense to him. But before he could spend very much time dwelling on what had caused this, the bus arrived and Georgy turned around, he hopped on board, and by the time the bus pulled up in front of his office building and he had gone through the doors of the BBC, Georgy had effectively forgotten about this pain in his leg. But when when he got up to his actual desk and sat down on his chair, when the underside of his thigh made contact with his chair, it sent that shooting pain into his leg, and immediately he noticed it. It was almost like he had a splinter stuck in the back of his thigh, and by pressing it down on the seat, it was driving that splinter deeper into his leg. And so Georgie stood up immediately, and he's grabbing at the back of his leg, and he's kind of craning his head to look down at the back of his leg, but he doesn't see anything there. And so he's standing there wondering what he should do. He's got a really busy day ahead of him, and he's thinking, should I maybe go to the bathroom and see what this is? But then he tells himself, you're overthinking it. This has got to be something minor. I need to get to work. And so he sat back down in his chair, being very careful with his right leg when he placed it down so as not to press too hard on the spot that hurt. And then he just got to work. And over the course of several hours, even though he knew there was kind of a dull, aching pain in the back of his leg, he mostly forgot about it. He was just doing his job. But by the second half of the day, in the early afternoon, the pain in his leg had become so excruciating that Georgie was literally gritting his teeth and sweating profusely in order to try to ignore the pain. But at some point, it just became too much. He couldn't focus on work, and so he stood up, he left his desk, and he walked down the hall, and he went into the single stall bathroom. And once he went inside and he shut the door behind him, he pulled his pants down and turned around and looked in the mirror to use the reflection to look at the back of his leg. And right away, there was a little bit of a relief there, because what he saw was a little bit of redness, a little bit of swelling, but nothing significant. It looked very much like someone must have hit him with a pencil by accident, or maybe it was a bee sting or a spider bite or something, but whatever it was definitely minor, at least in Georgie's mind. And so he pulls his pants back up, he tucks his shirt back in, he leaves the bathroom and goes back to his desk. And then he sits down, and despite this intense pain in his leg, he's convinced himself it's no big deal, and so he just kind of grits his way through the rest of his workday. When he finally got home again and walked through the door, Georgie's wife looked at him and was like, "What's wrong with you?" He was so pale, he was sweating profusely, he looked awful. And so he told her about what had happened with his leg, and he was still trying to kind of write it off. But she told him, "Georgie, you are sick, there's something wrong, we have to go to the hospital right now." And so at this point, Georgie was miserable, and so he agreed to go. And so the pair, they made their way over to the emergency room at the hospital. They go inside, and a doctor pulled Georgie into an exam room and said, "Okay, tell me what's going on. Why are you here?" And Georgie would explain how in his morning commute, he had stopped at this bus stop and then felt this shooting pain. And then he told the doctor, "I'm pretty convinced this is someone who might have accidentally jabbed me with a pen or a pencil, or it's a bug bite, a spider bite. I don't know what it is, but I'm convinced it's something minor." And so the doctor, he hears this, and he asks Georgie to stand up, pull his pants down so the doctor can get a look at the site. And so Georgie does. He gets up, he drops his pants, and then as the doctor bends down and begins looking at the back of his thigh, Georgie kind of turns around and looks down, and he's shocked at what he sees. Even though he does not have a full view of the back of his leg, it's obvious that the swelling and redness on the back of his leg has grown exponentially. It looks totally horrible. And so after a couple of minutes of the doctor looking at the back of his leg, the doctor stands up and looks puzzled and tells Georgie, "Hold on a minute, I need somebody else to get a look at this." And so the doctor goes out into the main hall, he comes back with another doctor, and that doctor comes over, he bends down, and he looks at the back of Georgie's leg as well. And after the two of them kind of talk to each other and they're looking at the back of his leg, they stand up and they walk around and they're facing Georgie now, and they say, "Okay, this is going to sound totally weird, but when you were at the bus stop, before you felt the pain in your leg, was anyone around you holding a snake or a reptile?" I know that sounds crazy, but the mark on the back of your leg looks exactly like a venomous bite. So Georgie's like, "No, I didn't see anyone with snakes or reptiles. There was nothing out of the ordinary about what was happening around me when I felt this pain in my leg. We were all just standing there, and then I felt it in my leg. That was it." And so the doctors would tell Georgie that, they didn't really know what was going on with his leg. And so the best thing to do here is just to admit him to the hospital and monitor him and, try to run some tests on him and try to make him comfortable. And so that night, Georgie was admitted to the hospital. He was set up in his own hospital room. And right away, the nurses and doctors began administering different combinations of medicines and treatments to try to lower the swelling and the pain in his leg. But it just seemed like nothing was working. And so all night, his condition seemed to get worse, not better. And then the next day, when he woke up, his leg was much, much worse. It was extremely swollen. It almost looked like a balloon that had been completely filled. It was very red. And Georgie himself himself was also beginning to lose touch with reality. He had become convinced that someone had tried to kill him, and that was why he was so sick. And this delusion of his got so extreme that he was afraid of his doctors and nurses. And so it became a big challenge trying to help him because he was effectively fighting them off. By the next day, Georgie's condition overall had become critical. He was very clearly on the brink of death, and his mind was effectively gone. But the doctors and the nurses really had no idea what was going on with him, and so there was nothing they could do to help him. And then on the last day he was in the hospital, the third day, Georgie would die. His body just shut down. Given the strangeness of Georgie's death, his body was sent for an autopsy to try to figure out what had caused that leg pain, because that seemed to be the trigger that ultimately killed him. And sure enough, during the autopsy, the coroner made a surprising discovery. Buried in the back of his right leg, right underneath the site that was where he felt the pain, was this little piece of metal. It was so small, the coroner actually almost didn't see it. But when he did see it, he put it under the microscope, and what he saw was this obviously man-made metallic disc that had these two small reservoirs drilled into it. And so they sent this disc off for further testing, and what they discovered was there was ricin residue inside of those two reservoirs. Ricin is an extremely powerful poison. It is more lethal than cyanide, and it has no antidote. And the symptoms of ricin poisoning often look like the symptoms of other diseases or illnesses, and so it's very difficult to diagnose. And so as a result of these factors, ricin is a very popular poison for assassinations. And the belief is that that is exactly what happened to Georgie. He was assassinated. But to this day, we don't actually know who assassinated him. However, the running theory is that Georgie, who was a reporter for the BBC, he covered politics, and he often spoke very critically about the Soviet Union. And so this theory goes that the Soviet Union's intelligence agency, known as the KGB, they assassinated Georgie for what he was writing about. Adding credence to this theory, a former KGB officer named Oleg Kalugin, who was exiled to the United States in 1991, he claimed that he oversaw the assassination program that targeted Georgy Markov. He said what they did is they put this little tiny disc, that metal disc with the ricin inside of it, they put that at the tip of an umbrella, and they made sure the disc itself was fairly sharp. And then the KGB assassin with this umbrella simply followed Georgie on his typical morning commute, and then when he stopped at that bus stop, the assassin jabbed him in the back of the leg and then faded into the crowd. According to Oleg, those little metallic discs that had the ricin inside of them, they were actually covered with a thin layer of wax, and only when this disc had been placed inside of the target's body would their body heat melt that wax layer off, exposing the poison, and then their target would die several days later, as Georgie did. However, Oleg's story, despite being as compelling as it was, didn't have any hard proof to back it up. And so to this day, there has been no one officially charged with Georgy Markov's murder. In 2006, 73-year-old Sherman Sizemore was the definition of a man's man. He had spent the bulk of his adult life doing one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, mining for coal in West Virginia. And while he was a coal miner, he apparently had lost track of the amount of times he had nearly been killed from mine shaft collapse and gas leaks. Later on in life, after his kids had all grown up, he had retired from coal mining and become an ordained Baptist minister, and despite his harrowing backstory and burly, intimidating appearance, he was known to be incredibly gentle and very calming to his parishioners. He was also known to be an incredibly devoted grandfather, to the point where if there was a chance to spend time with his grandkids, he would basically throw all of his responsibilities out the window to do that. But in January of that year, something changed in Sherman. He went from being this pillar in the community to being a deranged, paranoid lunatic. It all started on the afternoon of January 19th. Sherman and his wife Ruby were sitting in their home alone on the couch, just kind of doing their own things, when suddenly, out of the blue, Sherman just starts screaming as if he sees something in front of him that's terrifying him, and his screams startled Ruby so that she started screaming, and so she looks at her husband, and he's still just looking straight out ahead. He's terrified of something in front of him, and so Ruby looks from him to where he's looking, and there's nothing there. And so she turns back to her husband and she's like, what's going on? What are you screaming for? What are you so scared of? But Sherman wasn't able to speak. After he stopped screaming, he just continued to look straight out as if whatever had terrified him had him in this trance where he couldn't look away. And so his eyes are wide, his mouth is open, his face is going white, he's starting to sweat, and Ruby's starting to panic. She has no idea what's happening with him. And so eventually she just holds on to him and says, come back to me, come back to me. And Sherman at some point he kind of broke out of his trance and he looked at his wife and he just says, you can't leave me or they'll kill me. Ruby has never seen behavior like this in her husband ever. This is a completely different person she's interacting with. And so she has no idea what to do. And so instead she just kind of holds on to Sherman and prays that he doesn't start acting like that again. But that didn't happen. All day long, periodically, he would just start screaming about something that Ruby couldn't see. Now, Ruby did consider calling 911 and getting medics out there, but his behavior was so unusual, and he was normally such a rock who was so competent, who was so healthy that she didn't want to. She felt like he would just kind of get through this, that if they can just get through today and get into tomorrow, that he would be better. And so she just all day was comforting him and just dealing with these episodes. And then finally they got into bed that night, and Ruby's thinking, thank goodness, we're going to wake up tomorrow and things will be better. But when she woke up the next morning, it was very obvious Sherman had not slept at all. He was looking straight up at the ceiling. He looked worse than the day before. It was obvious that he was not back to normal. And so Ruby called the rest of the family and had them come over to figure out what they were going to do. But when Sherman found out his family was coming to his house, he told Ruby they can't come inside. He was afraid they and others were conspiring to bury him alive. The only person he could be around was Ruby, and his whole family had no idea what to do. Little did they know there was actually a very specific reason he was acting the way he was. A few months before January 19th, which was the day Sherman turned into this different person, a few months earlier, he began complaining of severe abdominal pains. And so he and his wife Ruby and his daughter, they went to the hospital, and the doctor, after examining him and running some tests, determined that most likely his pain was coming from his gallbladder. But the only way to be sure would be to do some exploratory surgery and literally look inside of Sherman's gut and look at his gallbladder and see if that was the problem. And so the doctor asked Sherman, are you prepared to do an exploratory surgery, or would you like to just kind of wait it out and see what happens with this pain? And so Sherman talked it over with his wife and his family, and they made the decision that the pain was just too much, and so they would go forward with the surgery. And so on the morning of January 19th, so again, this is the day that Sherman basically loses his mind, he goes into the hospital completely normal. He goes in with his wife, he goes in with his daughter, and he makes his way over to the surgery wing of the hospital. He says bye to his family, and he's put on a stretcher bed, and he's wheeled in and prepped for surgery, and then brought into the operating room. And while he was in the operating room, laying on his stretcher bed, flat on his back, looking straight up at all these bright lights above him, he just struck up some chit-chat with the nurses and doctors who were in the room, prepping the room for surgery, and they were also putting the IV into his arm. Then at some point, one of the nurses lowered the oxygen mask onto Sherman's face so the anesthesiologist could administer the 2-drug cocktail that would knock him out for the surgery. Sherman was scheduled to get something known as general anesthesia for this operation, where basically he would be completely out, he wouldn't feel anything, they'd do the surgery, and then he would wake up in recovery. And so once this mask was on Sherman's face, the anesthesiologist began pumping him full of the drugs that would make him be knocked out for the surgery. However, the anesthesiologist only administered one of the 2 drugs necessary for general anesthesia. He administered the paralyzing drug, but he did not administer the actual anesthetic that would knock him out, and most importantly, would get rid of all of his pain. And so as this mask is on his face and Sherman believes he's being given the proper dosage of drugs, the nurse who was nearby told Sherman to go ahead and start counting backwards in his head from 10, knowing full well that Sherman would pass out before he reached 0. And Sherman knew this too. He had been in surgery before, and so he happily began counting in his head. 10, 9, 8, he started to feel something. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Boom, he was out. Except he wasn't. When he reached 0 in his head, counting down, he realized he had not passed out. He began taking mental stock of what was going on, and he realized he could completely feel his body, but when he tried to move his body, he couldn't. He was completely paralyzed. When he tried to make a sound, he He couldn't, because his vocal cords were also paralyzed. The only thing he could move were his eyes. He could move them left and right. However, they had taped his eyes shut, so he can't see anything. And so Sherman is thinking to himself, okay, I've been given the drugs, maybe they're slow acting, any minute now I'm going to drift off to sleep and this will just be a distant memory. But after a few seconds, he's hearing the doctors and nurses in the room. He can't see them, but he hears them. They seem to be moving towards doing this operation, and he's still awake. And so Sherman becomes frantic and starts flicking his eyes left and right as fast as he possibly can. And the rapid eye movement actually loosened the tape on both of his eyelids, and it created a tiny slit that he could actually look through. And what he saw terrified him. The surgeon was walking over next to him. He was getting his gloves on. And then the surgeon says, "Scalpel." And the nurse hands him this chrome metallic blade, and the surgeon takes the blade and begins cutting into Sherman's midsection. Sherman felt everything, but Sherman couldn't do anything about it. All he could do was rapidly flick his eyes left and right in hopes one of them would see that he was awake, that he was feeling this. But no one was paying attention to his face, so they didn't see his eyes moving around. And so the surgeon continued to cut into his midsection until he had cut out a fairly significantly sized hole, at which point the surgeon hands the scalpel to the nurse and says, "Clamps," at which point the nurse hands him what looks like a torture device, and the surgeon proceeds to use these clamps to pin segments of Sherman's skin that has just been cut open to his body to basically keep the hole open. And then the surgeon began tugging on the outsides of this hole in Sherman's midsection, making sure it was big enough that he could actually get a good look into his body. And every little tug is sending lightning bolts of pain into Sherman's body. But again, all he can do is flick his eyes left and right, and no one's paying attention. "Scope," the surgeon called out for, and the nurse handed him a camera that he jammed into Sherman's gut. And then the surgeon said, "Suction," and the nurse got what looked like a vacuum and pressed it inside of this open wound and began sucking out fluids from his body. The pain Sherman was experiencing is unimaginable. Every second felt like an eternity. "Forceps," the surgeon called, and the nurse handed him these metal prongs that he put inside of this hole in Sherman's body, and he used them to dislodge his gallbladder so he could get a better look at it. By this point, Sherman wanted to die. He was no longer flicking his eyes left and right. He was just looking straight out, hoping someone would finally see him. And someone did. One of the nurses standing next to the surgeon looked up at Sherman's face and saw Sherman looking back, terrified at the nurse, at which point the nurse yelled out, "Stop, he's awake, he's awake!" And the surgeon practically faints, and he looks over at the anesthesiologist and he calls him, "Get over here and fix this." And so the anesthesiologist comes running over from the side of the room. He gets up next to Sherman and begins pumping him full of painkillers. And as he's doing this, he has this moment of clarity. He remembers he didn't give him the anesthetic. And so as these new painkillers that have just been introduced begin to take their effect, Sherman's eyes go from being terrified to glazed over, and he does pass off to sleep. And so now he's out and he can't feel anything. But now the anesthesiologist and the medical team realize they have a very big problem. This patient just experienced 16 minutes of surgery and felt all of it. And at the end of it, when he wakes up, he's going to remember it, and he's probably going to file a lawsuit against the hospital. And so a decision was made. It's unclear if the anesthesiologist acted alone or if the entire team was in on this, but regardless, the anesthesiologist administered an additional drug after giving all these painkillers. This additional drug was called midazolam, but it's better known as the amnesia drug. And like its nickname implies, anyone who gets it will forget what has just happened to them. And so the idea was, by giving him this amnesia drug, he won't remember the trauma he had suffered through during the surgery, and so wouldn't file a lawsuit. And so after he was given this drug, the medical team, they went back to doing the surgery, they completed it, and they